Okay, let's kick things off. Get started here. So, welcome everyone. This is the third of 9 cartography sessions that we've have scheduled for 2023. This series is hosted by Greater Cincinnati Grotto, and it's open to anyone in the world interested in participating. The first call was in February, and it featured Howard Kalnitz. He talked about his cartographic journey, in which he discussed cave maps, including Perfect Fall cave that he is most recently working on. And he demonstrated a number of cave survey and cartographic techniques. Last month, we heard from Gary Bush, who talked about the discovery and mapping of Precinct 11 cave, which is an absolutely amazing cave with incredible features. And if you missed his presentation, Gary's talk literally had it all: ancient cave bears, huge borehole, survey trips with thousands and thousands of feet of footage, unanticipated cave diving, and unexpected underground stays for days. So, with Gary and Howard's talks, the 2023 GCG Carto season has started off with some very informative and exciting topics. Tonight, we have 3 speakers: Bo Gergel, who will be talking about challenging sketching situations. I think he's going to focus on cross sections. Dan Garreau, who will talk about Graham Spring Cave, and Pat Cambyses, who will talk about profiles. I'd also like to put in a plug now for next month's speakers. On May 17th, we'll be hearing from Christian DeSell and Bert Ashbrook. That will be May 17th right here. Same bat time, same bat channel. So, without further ado, let's dive into tonight's presentations. Bo will be our first speaker. Bo caves primarily at Mammoth, as well as in Jackson, Pulaski, Wayne, and Rockcastle counties in Kentucky. He's leading the push along with Howard Kalnitz to make the John Henry Whit Pit system the longest and deepest in Jackson County, Kentucky. And tonight he'll be talking with us for the next 15 minutes or so on how to ensure that plans, profiles, cross sections are telling complementary stories. Bo, take it away. Let me make sure that you can present. Making you presenter.
It is just 15 minutes. And can everybody see this?
Yes, can see your slide and your laser pointer.
And at any point in this discussion, we'll start to see where we're going with this. And the questions that I have on the left, right, just ask yourself those questions. Up with an answer. And if you feel like you got an answer and it fits into this, just word it out. Things, but I do question focus to just kind of get our brains moving for our next 2 speakers. And Pat, who's also speaking, actually taught me how to do survey and cartography with Howard over in the Mammoth CRF area. And I look up to them greatly, so I'm excited to see Pat speak today. And, everyone, let me know what you think about this, because this is going to get pretty weird. Some of this requires some background knowledge, and I kind of try to get us all on the same page before I propose, I guess, what I'm calling the Jesus lines. So let's see what we think about it. This is going to be the plan only. And the red laser pointer showing too?
Yes.
All right. And 15 minutes. And oftentimes while we go through this, you're going to think in your head, and hopefully it makes sense why, you're going to think, just draw a cross section. So as you're thinking that, I know we're all going to be thinking at a point, but pretend we just can't for a second at some of these questions that get asked. And it's for the sake of the discussion. And there's sort of a profile idea I had this with, but it made sense to start with plan. So I just started drawing and came up with this and let my imagination take me and to this journey we're all about to go on. So the scenario happened when I was cartography and surveying fallen timber caves. Happened between 2015 and 2022. and we're just focusing on the plan. So, Google Enhance, here's the plan again, zoomed in a little bit, and we're going to focus on this section here, Enhance. So here we are. And I wrote some questions on the side there, but ultimately the situation that I ran into was over here. So if everybody can see that, what's going on over there that's weird, if anybody sees anything and is willing to blurt something out really quick.
It's a ledge and a ceiling ledge. It's a floor ledge and a ceiling ledge.
Yeah, and that's sort of what this is all about. I never know what to do when this happens. And in the cartography here, I was like, you know what? I'll just put these railroad tracks in, and I got a cross section, so it doesn't matter. And I even kind of went for this floor drop and ceiling height to kind of say this is two different things. This is a 3-foot ceiling height here and a floor drop below it. I can't say this is correct. I could say that it maybe works for the situation if you look at this as like an isolated map and there's no other section where you're going to have anything like this. So we're going to break this down on what the railroad tracks really probably should be used as, and it's really not this. And what this looks like.
And say this is the symbol for exactly what you're doing. So why would this not be for this?
All right, cool. Well, I'm glad you said that, because at the time I thought so too. And I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm just saying I thought about it more, and I'm like, is it? So, and I'll tell you why I thought that, and you guys can kind of beat me up on this, which would be nice. I'm ready to be heard again. We're going to go through this. This is the sketch I just made one night. I was like, and I kind of try to make it look nice for this. And I was like, I'll just put it on a PowerPoint and go through each one zoomed in. So we're going to go through all these and try to make sense of this. And then we're going to come back to this slide at the end. And that's really it. And 15 minutes will be up. So, and I'm not saying this is wrong either. I just started with this situation. So we can have this situation where we have two connected passages, and I just want to get us on the same page here. You could draw these passages independently, but if they actually did connect, you would have something in between them. I don't think dotted lines are the correct thing, and we'll come back to that too. But you can also show ceiling heights in your plan view to kind of give more of the story, like 0.5 ceiling, 0.5 floor. This is like a 1 foot passage in between these two passages. So what I ask here is, I guess, do these little ceiling things need to be here?
So what you're showing there, and first of all, any symbol that you use that you want to use, as long as you put on the map what you mean by it, then you can use any kind of symbol you want. Now, it's kind of nice, if you use standard symbols in the sense just so that people can, know immediately what you're talking about. But but as far as what you drew here, the standard of that means is that there's 0.5 feet of air over 0.5 feet of water. And I say that as somebody who started caving in Missouri, and that's a very common symbol for air over water. And that's some of the information that you want to know there, because you want to know, is it going to be like waist high or neck deep or whatever. So
right. So this should be shown as a 1.
Pardon?
Oh, and the scale. Sorry, I didn't mention the scale. It's 1 block is 1 foot, so it's a 1 inch to 10 feet for the scale for this. So this should just be a 1 circle.
Unless you decide that you like that symbol, and then you could put it. See, the point is, you could put it in your legend and say, "This is what this means." This is what this means in Ohio or whatever. But I'm just telling you what the standard is. I'm not saying
okay. No, and that's what this is all about, and whatever we can all gain from whoever needs to hear this, including me. Now we got these dotted lines here. What else could these dotted lines be?
Well, first of all, is that passage that connects them? Is it a discrete passage, or does it like, if I were to walk 30 feet down the passage, would I still see that?
Let's
For
go
me,
yes.
I don't know. Pardon?
Let's just say yes for.
Okay.
Or why is that important to you in this situation?
Well, because the way that I see it, it looks like there's one place where I could crawl through and get into the other passage. Okay. And so that just from looking at that cross section. But when I look at your plan view, I'm like, well, but maybe that is not one discrete place. Maybe it's one like long bedding plane thing, and that's what it looks like. The dashed lines would kind of confuse me because I would be like, well, what do those dashed lines mean? To me, they mean uncertainty. But
yes, okay.
What you could do is, it depends on, and it's all about your perspective too, your point of view. Either way, what I would do is I would, they would look like little crosses is how I would, just because if you're coming out of this little crawly thing, you can look up and the ceiling's over your head and you can look down and it's, then you're at a ledge. So you kind of see both.
Yes.
So you could make them little crosses, just like you showed in your other plan view, the railroad track thing. And the reason why I say crosses, I mean, usually dashed features mean they're on the ceiling. There might be a better way, you could be creative on how you show it.
For today, for this stuff, if I would have done this again, if I had known where I was going with it and the whole thing, I would have done this as a floor drop with a ceiling drop kind of right next to it on each side.
And that would be clear. That would be,
and that would more better represent this. But right. This is sort of an outlier to everything because I started with this and that's where I was like, oh, we could talk about this and stuff. But no, thank you so much for all the insight, and it's all about the discussion. So please keep this going, and this should be a lot more clear to everybody. We're just going to establish what we already know and make sure we all agree with it. You show a ceiling drop with these T marks going this way. Over here we have 2 foot of ceiling height. No water going on here, right, Pat? I didn't make that mistake here, but then you have 10 feet of ceiling height on this side, 10 feet of ceiling height on that side. This should look good. I think this is how this is done. And I throw the question in there, do you still need a cross section with the height markers in your plan? Like, should you, or vice versa, do you need both of these?
Well, I guess just to be absolutely okay, if I was entering this in some competition, I would put both of them in there, just because there's always going to be somebody that will say, well, what does that really mean? Okay, but if you're just trying to make good cave maps, I would use both, just because then it makes it clear, like there's no doubt. Mm-hmm. So your whole point is to make maps that are as clear as possible and not confuse anybody or be ambiguous. And so whatever you need to do to make your map as understandable as possible, then that's what you should do.
Awesome. And I think something I thought of as well was, as a cartographer, if you're putting this all together and you can't fit this cross section for whatever reason, you could just go put these in as a cartographer if you were pressed with such space, maybe. But I liked your answer more. So this is the same situation, but with floor ledges. So I'm just establishing this, that we use floor ledges in this way. I did something interesting here. I'm going to kind of skip to the next stuff, but I did something interesting here with, this is a pit, right? You would say this is a pit depth. So you could show on this side a pit depth of 8 and the rest of the height being 2, because it's a total of 10 feet. But on this side, we just showed 10. So you could kind of go one or the other here. You could have the 10 and the 2, or the 2 and the 8. Or you could put like a 10 there and an 8 there.
Well, the square 8 to me means it's a climb. Like I put my climbs in Bo, you don't have to do what I do, okay? I always want my cartographic children to do whatever it is they want to do. But I always think of, if it's a pit, then I like to put like to differentiate it. So there's no confusion. Is this a climb up or is this a pit?
I like that. And this is like a half pit even, so it doesn't really work here too, I'd say, because this side's just the regular wall. Well, I guess that is still the drop. I guess you
I
can
mean,
mark
yeah,
the wall.
it's still showing a drop. So
But-
yeah, I think that's totally relevant there. And like I said, if I looked at that, I'd say, oh, well, okay, there's something going on. There's some obstacle in the middle, and you go up. One side of it is 8 foot, but then the other side is 10 foot. So I'd be confused, like,
Right.
because they're really the same on both sides, but you're showing them. So then I would be confused.
Yes, and this,
cross section.
the different one, yeah. So just draw a cross section is usually the conclusion we keep coming to. And you'll see more of that. And this is just for the discussion to put this in, if I was to show this, this would be a 10 as well. The eight would certainly, or at least uniform with another 8 there. But again, we got the floor ledge. So getting into the meat of it a little bit more, the plus signs. So for my experience, if I have a canyon slot, I can put 2 of the ceiling changes next to each other, facing each other, I guess, in that respect, or however you want to think about it. Or I've always done the plus signs for this. So is this wrong here? And
no,
okay,
it's not wrong. Neither one of them are wrong. If it was like really a narrow like ceiling channel or something that a person couldn't get into, then I would use the lower one. But if there's something that like I could put my head in at least, then I would go for the upper one. But once again, they could both mean the same thing, which is why you need the damn cross section.
And with that being said too, when I was thinking about this, I was like, well, I sometimes use this if I don't have enough space for this. But then when I drew them both out here, I was like, it's really like the same amount of space when you're getting this close anyway. So that answers that question, but also establishes, all right, we have our plus signs and what those mean. They mean a canyon. Same thing for the floor, and I went crazy again, and I played with the little circles because it's just having a good time. We have the floor ledge. You can show a floor ledge, I believe, by railroad tracks. And yeah, there's a lot going on with the heights that we could get into here that I was playing with, but for the most part, and with time that we have, I want to just establish that is this correct? The railroad tracks for a floor canyon like this.
As long as you have a cross section that accompanies it, then no, seriously, because I would be like,
you're right.
What does that mean? Because technically that is correct. Because if a dashed features are on the ceiling and straight, full lines are on the floor, so that's just the opposite of a really narrow like string channel. So that I would think, well, maybe that's what that is.
And so this brings us back to me thinking about this way too long with too much bourbon. When we go back to the beginning here, well, now I'm seeing floor canyons, but thank God I just drew that cross section. So now I'm seeing floor canyon. So, what the hell's up? So what could we do here if this was just always a floor canyon, no matter what, and we just said this was wrong? What would be a new symbol for this? And this is kind of where I just had fun with it. Now, here's the situation. Here's the cross-section situation with a ledge coming out. And we can show it as a floor drop. And I played with, this is just me playing with height markers to try to make sense of this floor drop being this. We could show it as a ceiling drop. Again, attempting to play with the height markers to make sense of this. But both of these, I don't think, paint the proper picture. However, as Pat's been insinuating, as long as you draw a cross-section with it, that symbol might work. Furthermore, we can go into, well, let's try the ceiling markers with the floor ledge. And you even said, I even saw here, I tried to do like, well, okay, 5 ceiling, the column or the protrusion is 1 foot in width and a floor drop. almost, this is just kind of, I don't know if this is theory or what at this point, but just playing with how could we show this? And I don't know if any of these are really correct. And I'm curious if anyone has any input on that before we go to the next slide.
Oh, when I look at it, my brain just appreciates the railroad track for the little protrusion thing that we're seeing in this cross section more than anything here. Because like your bottom one is like a little bit busy. Like there's a lot going on that plan, and like it is factually correct, but it just seems busy to my brain. Whereas then that railroad track just seemed, I don't know, it just seemed more simple and easier for me. I don't know.
And it will save you, this sounds like corny, it'll save you like 3/4 of a second to sketch the railroad track, because any little bit of time that you could save so that you could give your undivided attention to your sketch.
That's a good point.
You know, because to me it's like, oh, I need to put 2 lines in here. And now I'm spending, not that I mean, yes, you should try to spend, you know, a reasonable amount of time on your sketch. But if you want to be efficient in your sketching, you know, you want to make it, you don't want to have to think, you don't want to make it too elaborate. You know, whatever you need to do to make it understandable. Because you have people on your survey team and you're sitting there trying to figure out what symbol I should use, and just use what's simple that will, you know, that will buy you the most time to let you, because I see sketching as, you can't sketch fast, but what you can do is you can be efficient. And every time you could do something to save you a couple of seconds, you know, so that you could give it your undivided attention and not be distracted by anything, then that's kind of the direction that I like to go with that.
I like that a lot, because in the end, it just gets to the cartographer anyway, and they might do something else with the symbol you use.
Well, as long as they know what your symbol means.
Right, with a good cross section. So, well, that totally. So this rabbit hole I went down, I was like, this isn't right. This isn't right. This isn't right. What I did in the beginning, I was like, well, I just said that wasn't right, and I tried to kind of do this weird square and circle thing, because I said that these were like a floor canyon. So I came up with the possible solution, the Jesus lines or the hashtags. Now, super busy again, but you maybe wouldn't have to show all that. But again, you would have a cross section anyway for this. But you could do these sort of Jesus lines, which are a plus and a railroad track married, or the hashtag, which is also sort of a marrying of the plus signs. And maybe that's how we show this madness. But I think we've come to the conclusion that it doesn't matter what you use here. And I couldn't have done that without all of your input, everyone.
Well, you obviously did do it without all of our input.
And it was this madness. But so I think that's the moral of the story is, you know, cross sections are important, but make sure you explain what you're drawing and be efficient. I flipped this out on the other side here really quick, but I'm going to kind of skip through this with time. And I threw in some examples here as that, but I don't think we have enough time for this. But I just said, okay, well, what if we invert this? This is back to our similar beginning situation. And really, over here kind of addresses it. A floor drop with the ceiling drop. And if this was just a 1 maybe, it sort of somehow attempts to explain that within this is 1. I don't know, maybe you could put it there. So just another example I ran through, and I said, well, could we show this with the hashtags instead, or the Jesus lines instead? So for the protrusion, we could show the Jesus lines here, and for the other way around, we could show the hashtags. But in the end, if you have a contained map and you have a key to that map, even though we talked about the situation where the railroad tracks are a canyon, if there's no other floor canyon shown with these railroad tracks, this could be correct, I guess. So I don't know if it's wrong. I don't know what you guys think after all of that. There's a whole nother version of this with profiles to get into, but I think the moral of the story is kind of what Pat helped us uncover here in this journey. So thank you all for coming along on it. This is and then I said, here's a profile version of this. Down here in the profile, for those that are still awake, can you show a canyon kind of with this method? But that's for another day. So that's all I got there.
Bo, thanks so much.
Thanks, Bo.
That was great. I really liked the way that you told that story. That was fantastic. I think we should have a whole series on Jesus lines. I mean, we could like all of these cave maps that, you know, are just full of those things. Would be.
So is that
The resurrection of Jesus lines.
Is that like a real thing? Like, because when he said Jesus lines, I was like, well, does that mean that there's an absolute right way to do things and it's the Jesus line? And so reveal to us, what is the Jesus line?
If somebody's trying to sketch a protrusion or whatever like that, I'm just going to tell them to use the Jesus lines and leave it at that.
That was great. Thanks so much, Bo.
Thank you for everyone who's in the session.
Okay, next up is Dane Garreau. Dane is a tag caver who frequents the hills of Tennessee, Alabama, and Georgia, always on the lookout for new caves and pits that he hasn't yet dropped. To date, Dane has done 114, although that number might be higher now. 114 unique 100-foot pits, and has turned in 34 cave maps. That number might also be higher. Nope, 34. 114 and 34. Those are big numbers. Tonight, he'll be talking with us about his map of Graham Spring Cave. Dane, all yours.
All right. I'm trying to share the screen. It says, ask the presenter to make me a presenter or something. Never mind. I think it's letting me do it. Okay. Oh, there we go. All right. I believe I'm sharing my screen now. Wonderful. Okay, let's bring up the PowerPoint. Let's start. Oh, no. Let's start at the beginning. All right. This is Graham Spring Cave. Can you see my pointer or cursor?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, perfect. Okay, so the cave right here and the blackness that you can kind of see, and you can see a caver for scale. This is a big stream bed, dry stream bed that goes right down the middle of the cove. It's called Graham Spring. So we've got that. This cave was mapped back in '78 by none other than the legend, Mr. Bilter Road. To be honest, his map is exactly like the cave is. I know it's a little bare, but he shows the cave just like it is. So I will say, even, or what was the saying? You know, even not a great map is still a map. It's still something good. And we appreciated this map. And Alex Landby, who's on the call right now, organized the first trip. He saw this 30-foot waterfall with dotted lines and decided we needed to dome climb it. And C was at the top. So we did. And there was something at the top. We've got Matteo Bucalosi. He's climbing up, and it's just a nice dome with a great lead. He got up there, and this was not a survey trip to begin with. It was a scooping trip. We're just going to see what's up there. So we scooped. We got to the top of this 30-foot waterfall and went a few hundred feet in mostly hands and knees crawling canyon. And we got to another waterfall that Alex was almost able to free climb up. But we said, you know what? Let's come back next weekend. We will come prepared for this waterfall and we will survey this cave since we have found a significant extension to it. The quote over here is from Bilter Road. Airflow in a small stream indicated a possible upper entrance. Well, he was correct, and we found that possible upper entrance. As my team was surveying, the scoop team and the aid climb team, they climbed that waterfall and then scooped the passage above it, which was fine. We discussed that beforehand. And they got to the end of the cave and they could see daylight. They tried to take a GPS point with their phone and then find it on the surface. They could not. But then after we got done surveying the cave, we went up, found where the Pennington Spring sinks into the rubble, and dug in the most, I guess, sort of obvious spot, and we were able to connect it. So yippee, an upper and a lower entrance. So here's the map. I'm gonna zoom in here in a second so we can get kind of a better view of what's going on. But just like we'll look at the plan view first. Got the entrance, and you go here, and then you've got dotted line dome that went. You've got this sort of squiggly canyon. There's Pothole Pit. It's a taller dome, but it's only 13 feet. And then you have some more canyon, and finally you get to the end. What I kind of wanted to point out here was not to show the map necessarily, but to show this part, which is the sort of surface survey. We did the cave on Saturday and surveyed all that. 795 feet, pretty good. And then Sunday I came back solo and we camped nearby. And I did a surface survey from here, which is the upper entrance, surveyed the non-qualifying Pennington Spring, because I feel like that's very helpful to the reader, and surveyed down the big main creek bed all the way down here. And then Alabama, Jackson County, 1993, that is Graham Cove Cave, which is a very significant wet multi-drop. So went to that, surveyed, like one station inside of it and has that on there. So I just feel having that surface survey is a great aid to anyone visiting this cave, because they can really help you visualize where you are in relation to the cave. And navigation is a pretty important part of the map. So I thought that was pretty necessary. We've of course got the LiDAR overlay, which is a little light. There's the red, that's the cave. And really it's to show that the cave is right there in the middle of the cove and the stream bed, just in case you couldn't tell that from here. We're gonna back out of this. Let's see, yep. And let's pull this up. I'm going to go in a little more in depth. So I know Pat's going to talk about profiles here in just a moment, and her profile is going to be way better than this, but there is a way that you can make the profile usable and easy to do, and that is by doing an extended profile view in your map. So the technique I use is I go in, I create a separate compass file, which is what I use for my data management. And I physically change one by one all of the compass readings to either 90 degrees or 270 degrees. And that gives you the extended profile view that you have in your sketch from the cave. Because if you were to do just a regular, facing west profile view, you're going to miss out on some stuff because the cave is squiggly. It goes south, it goes west, it goes north. And so you're going to lose sight of passage. Now, I know Pat's going to show you a technique to fix that, and it's a great technique. But here's another one to put in your toolbox. Just a simple extended profile view. The sketches match up perfectly from your in-cave sketches. You just, upload them, put them on the line plot, and then there you go. So that's really all it is to it, to doing a simple profile. I've had a few people ask me how to do it, and this is it. So we got the big cliff. Yes, Aaron?
A quick question. I've always wondered.
Yes.
I've always thought so we usually use projected profiles. We project it along a plane of the plan or whatever. And I've always thought extended are like way more useful. and I always wonder why people don't use them more often. And because I think they're more useful. I don't know if anyone else thinks differently, but and I didn't know. I've never done one on cartography before. I've always done the projected ones, so I never thought about how you would actually have to change that 90-degree, 270-degree thing. And I can't quite say I understand it completely yet, but I never even considered having to change some of that information to get that plot to trace over.
Well, you don't really have to do that because there is a little application in Compass that will unwind your profile to make an extended profile. And what it shows there is that's the way that people started making profiles, because that's the easiest way to do it. You just follow your sketch. Like, you don't have to do anything fancy on the sketch. And the extended profile is a total standard way of showing the profile of your cave. And a lot of people do their profiles like that. But Dane, I'm pretty sure that there is something in Compass that will do that for you so that you don't have to do it. When you just have a little bit of cave like that, it doesn't really matter because it's not that much data. But if you had a lot more data, it would probably, you'd be like, I wish I didn't have to change all these. So look for that, because I'm pretty sure that that's in there. I really like that you're showing geology on your map. And, to me, that information with the cave map information is like that's like maximum amount of information, and it tells you so much about the cave to know that information. Before, we would draw caves and they were like drawn in a vacuum. It's like they're not showing the relationship to the surface. And I think that it's critical, really. We should be showing the relationship of the cave to the surface always, because that's really valuable information.
Thank you, Pat. So one thing, I'm going to pull back up Mr. Terode map. And so if you're familiar with TAG, usually when it's a spring cave, it's either at the valley floor or it's a Pennington spring cave. And I had looked at this map, I don't know, years ago, and I looked at it and I saw the lead, and that looks pretty neat. Well, it's probably just a Pennington spring cave. It's, high up, and it's, it's a spring cave. You see the water coming out of it. And so usually aid climbs in the Pennington are generally a little less fruitful. So I didn't think much of it. And thankfully, Alex, didn't care. He had an idea it'd be a good lead, and it was. But you just didn't know that until we really got out there. And let's see. And we found the, and we found the actual Pennington Spring. And so we found this hiking down the stream bed and thought it was interesting. And that let me know immediately. It's like, oh, well, maybe this cave is not a Pennington cave. And we're in the cave, and surely doesn't seem like any Pennington cave I've ever been in. And it certainly was not. So yeah, that was sort of the goal, is to show, where the cave is in relation to everything else. And with that, I think that's really all I have to say about it. Unless anyone has any questions.
Yeah, that's a really nice map, Dane. Yeah, I think that's a cool technique with the extended profile, and tell them the story. I like it when people put the topo on there as well, so you can see. And I think Pat pointed out, was it colored by geology underneath it?
The topo map was not colored by geology, but the let's see. You know what? I'm actually going to share it, and I'll show this more in detail. Let's see, real quick.
Is that like a DEM? So it's colored by elevation?
It's colored by elevation. I did not do it. Steve Davis did it for me. But let's see this. So the bricks, I made the bricks different here. So let me zoom in a little bit so we can see. We've got our normal Bill Terode style banger, and it is listed in the key. And then I've got these. I didn't know what the Pennington bricks were supposed to look like, so I just made my own and made them look different. And I put it in the legends, so it's noted. But yes, so this kind of lets the reader know, like, oh, that's the Pennington layer, and now we're in the banger.
Yeah, so Dane, if you want to keep doing that, putting in that geology, USGS has a whole bunch of swatches that you can download for Illustrator that have like the different standard types of limestone bricks and all the other bedrock symbols.
Yes, and I probably should. I think this is actually the first map that I've indicated a difference, because geology is not my specialty, but this one was pretty easy to tell.
Oh, it looks great.
Can you bring up your map again, Dane?
Yes.
I have a
Yes.
suggestion for you.
Okay, let's hear it. I haven't turned it in yet, so I will probably take that suggestion and fix it.
Okay, so notice on your cross sections, you have limestone in there, which is cool, but they look really boxy. And so you could smooth them out. If you smooth them out a little bit, you could just like take your, digital pen and maybe like draw like a circle of white and soften up the, so that you see how it looks really angular. You can soften it up if you just kind of like take a pen and make sort of a balloon around it and make it a closed feature, so that your cross section still shows up, but it's not as blocky looking. It looks a little more natural. And that's not,
Okay.
I'm not incorrect. I'm just making a suggestion. And I think I might have something on one of my maps that if you don't know what I mean, I could show you.
No, I know what you mean. So yes. I know exactly what you mean. Yes.
Dane, is the limestone flat lying the way you've shown it in the cross section?
Can you repeat the question, please?
Is the limestone exactly flat lying, horizontal, the way you've shown it in the cross section?
That's a great question, and I actually have I don't know. Yeah. So you're saying is it tilted? Is there any dip? And I don't know.
You're in tag, so there's very little dip. There might be exceptions. Every once in a while, you might like, if you just make all of your maps like that, in that's appropriate for the geography and geology of your region. Trying to make maps that accurately show like the dip is not real easy, because the cave, like, especially if your cave meanders, because in some places it's going to look straight on like that, and in other places, if you take a turn, then you might see the dip. So
I'm just saying, if you're showing flat, no dip limestone in the cross section, that implies that you know that's correct. If you don't know that's correct, I think it's sort of cheating to show that, because you don't know if that's true or not.
I don't agree with that. I think that that's a generic sign for limestone. And if you put a dip on it and you didn't go measure it, then that's cheating. But if you're just wanting to show generic limestone, then that's perfectly okay.
Once you dip,
But that's a start.
I disagree with that, Pat. I think if you're showing it flat lying I mean, we know it's in limestone, right? You can put that in the notes. If you're showing it in your section and your profile as being flat lying, that implies it's flat lying limestone. And if you don't know that, I wouldn't show that.
Well, then I guess you could not put the limestone symbol at all. But according to but the USGS symbol that means limestone no matter what, if you're going by USGS symbols. So if you want to be correct, then you could say that these are the USGS symbols. And if you go look up the USGS symbols, it says this is what a swatch of limestone looks like. So, I wouldn't call it wrong. I would just say, because technically no limestone is completely flat, really. So you could make a note that says it's dipping at blah, blah, blah. You know, you could do that too. Depends on how accurate you want to be with the geology. But I think if you explain things well on your map, I don't think that you know, you're wrong. Just like what Bo is saying, is this right or is this wrong? I'm like, dude, it's whatever you want it to be.
Fair enough. If you put a note on there that says, hey, the limestone dips, you know, 10 degrees to the northwest, and you show it flat lying, that explains it. But without that kind of note, I think it implies that the limestone's flat lying. And if you haven't determined that, that's, you know, misleading, in my opinion.
I'm gonna weigh in with this is Rachel. I'm gonna weigh in with Pat on this one. I think that showing the limestone on there is really good. I think that showing it in that default horizontal position is not implying that it's flat lying, and that it would be a large expectation to think that everyone would go through and take strikes and dips while they're doing their cave mapping. And if you want to be super thorough, you could put a note that says bedrock structure not included.
Yeah, John Dunham does that. John Dunham makes these fantastic maps where he does go in and take the strike and dip, and he draws it the way it is. Cool. And that's just amazing that he does that. It takes him a long time to do it. But
that's not for everyone. But
that's exactly what I'm talking about. That if when you show it, you know, lying exactly horizontal, it implies it's horizontal. If you show it dipping, it implies it's dipping.
Well, I think the reason why John shows it the way that he does is because he's in a very structurally complex area. And so, you know, yeah, you would want to put things, you would want to show your thing correctly. But we're not in a real structurally complex area, so it doesn't really matter.
If you haven't measured the dip, I would not show the limestone blocks surrounding the cross sections, because we all know it's limestone. You've probably said on the map what formation the cave is formed in, and so including the limestone formation, you know, around the cross section doesn't add information unless if you've included, you know, a statement that it's formed in the XYZ limestone.
It looks really pretty.
It just implies that it's horizontal.
It's an aesthetic thing too. Yeah.
Okay, Dave.
Whatever you want to do.
Thanks so much. Great presentation, great cave map, and thanks for describing your process to include all of the information, the layers of the bedrock, where the cave sits. Your guys surprised that it's in the Banger, not in the Pennington.
And the stream bed, the surface stream bed is awesome.
The stream bed, absolutely, to tell a complete story about what's happening with that cave. So great map.
Thank you very much. I'm glad I could spark some discussion about it. So appreciate it.
Take those damn limestone out of your cave map.
Put it back in.
It's awesome.
Put it back in. Okay. All right. So.
Whatever makes you happy, Dave.
Okay. So next we have Pat Cambysis, and I could describe a lot of things about her in detail and say things like Lou Bicking Award winner, Letchagee Explorer Mapper, author.
I say that Pat likes to map caves. That's good enough.
Researcher. Hey, I've got a script here. I got to go through this whole thing. There's a punchline, PK. Teacher of all things caving. Number of us are her cartography children. Cave survey, cave cartography, geography teacher, manager of caving expeditions, and most importantly, a huge fan of Tyler's homemade chocolate chip cookies.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So she's going to talk to us about whatever she wants to, although I believe it's going to be techniques she's developed for making vertical profiles more effective. And with that, PK, the floor is yours, and I will give you presenter.
And I will hopefully share it. Okay, I need to make sure I got the correct side of my screen here. I have one of these crazy double screen things. Ah, share. Can you all see that? So basically, I just have. Can everybody see that? Okay, by the way.
You see your documents if that's what you wanted. FDAT, which I'm assuming is a .dat file, not FDAT.
Oh, actually, I am also. Okay, so what do I need to do?
There, oh, that looks good.
That looks good?
Grotto Marie Jean.
Oh, okay, so this is the side of the screen that you see.
Oh, now I'm seeing the PowerPoint.
Okay. You're seeing what? Oh, yes, that's what you're. Yes. So, let me put on the slideshow here. Okay, so what I want to talk about, obviously, is one of my favorite subjects in cave cartography, and that is profile. And I love profiles. And when I first started caving and saw cave maps, I thought that they looked just real abstract to me. You know, it's like, yeah, it kind of looks like a worm or an intestine or whatever. And so I wasn't real excited about cave maps for quite a while until I saw some amazing cave maps that were made by some Swiss cartographers. And they had these just like these mind-blowing profiles. And I was like, oh my God, I want to do that. I want to make maps that look like that. And it took me a while to figure out how to do it. But, you know, I'm just a really big proponent of profiles, regardless of whether you have a vertical cave or not. So when I first started doing this, people are like, well, you're wasting your time. It's just a horizontal cave. And you know, if it's a vertical cave, you show profile. If it's a horizontal cave, all you need is cross sections, you know, and it's no big deal. And I don't agree with that. I think that just as I was saying to Bo, anything that you do to make your map understandable to somebody who's not a caver, that's kind of what I strive for, is how can I make a map so that anybody who looks at it can know at least what they're looking at? And so I started putting profiles in there. And here, you know, Tragrebal, it's a horizontal cave in the Philippines. And it does have like a sort of an upper entrance. And I'm not 100% happy with how I did this, because I feel like if I would have drawn in the bedrock, I could have showed that a little bit better. But I got, you know, the sense is that the profile gives you the three-dimensionality of the cave. And note what I do with the walls here, and I'll explain that later. So here's another example of a cave, and that's a, you know, pretty nice regular plan view. But when you put the cross section or the profile in there, then to me that kind of like makes the cave come alive. Like now I understand, you know, what I'm looking at, and you know how the cave is laid out. So as long as you have pretty, you know, kind of linear looking passages, then the profiles are pretty easy to do. And I started doing the extended profiles, but I decided that I didn't like those, just for me. It's not that I don't like them, they're fine, but I didn't want to make them. It was like I wanted it to really look like the cave, which caused me a tremendous amount of pain, because caves are not always nice linear looking things. And I think that the profile just adds so much. So here's a cave. If you look at the plan view, it's like, oh, here's the plan view. It looks like a gazillion other caves in tag, right? Well, but when you put the profile on it, then it kind of like gives you a real sense of the three-dimensionality of it. And to try to enhance that is, if you notice, all these little, like I shaded it gray so that it would stand out a little bit more. And then I started putting these lines in there, and these things this is all about kind of artistic license, okay? So the cave wall doesn't look exactly like that, but what that does is it helps portray the three-dimensionality of the cave. It tricks your eye into thinking that you're looking inside the cave, when in reality you're not. And so, and the important thing about this is that line weights are absolutely critical. Because if you were to make all those features the same line weight, it would look very different. It would look really crappy. So you have to show, just like with the plan view, where for the walls, you make the walls whatever the biggest line weight you decide you want to make it, and then everything else kind of progressively is thinner. You can do the same with the profiles. And it is extremely, extremely effective. It took me a while to figure out that that's what made the Swiss maps look so good, is how they manipulated the line weights. And so the line weights are like really like powerful, I think, parts of, or a powerful thing that you could do for really making your map understandable. Now for this, this is not showing up really well, but I do have limestone around all my cross sections, and the cave doesn't really have any dip in it. If it did, I would have written it down, just because at that time I was thinking geology, I want to know what everything is, and I would put it in the map. But the reason I started putting the limestone around the cross sections in the first place was because I felt like it made them pop away from, gave them a little pop away from the plan view. And it made it was more of a visual interest to it. So I wasn't necessarily going for showing the exact dip. I was actually interested in making that like stand out in the map so that it was more of a kind of an aesthetic thing. And I know people will say, well, maps shouldn't be aesthetic. They're not art. They should be science or whatever. But I think they should be both. Just like, if someone were to explain something to you in like an absolutely crazy, wild voice, that would be distracting from what they're trying to say. And I take the artistic license that you can use with cave maps is that you can say a lot with a little bit of artistic license. You lose a little bit of accuracy, but for the purpose of this map, that really doesn't matter. My goal, and every map has a purpose. Most of the time, we're just trying to, document the cave. But, my goal is to make this as understandable to people as possible. Notice I put like a little ramp here, and I try to make any kind of background stuff that I put in there. I try to gray it out and make it very subtle so it doesn't take away from the art part of the map. So that's another trick that you could use, is when you're putting lines, when you have a lot of lines in there, make them like a gray tone and make them subtle, or whatever, put a transparency on them. And that makes everything like stand out even more, without saying. One other thing you can't see up here because I cut it out by accident, but I have a rigging list. And I always do include what is the rigging that you need to do the cave. And I was criticized about this a few times, because then it's like, well, then everybody knows what the rigging is and they can all go do the cave. And I was like, okay, why not? And so once again, it's like, the more information that you could put on there, the better, but you want to present it in such a way that it's not overwhelming. And so that's kind of a trick, because there's so much detail that we can put on caves, and we don't want to make them overwhelming, but we want to put it all in there. Okay, here's a typical cave. It's not behaving. It's not making a nice straight line. How do I deal with the profile there? So I kind of played around with just trying to draw it in 3D, and then I decided that I didn't want to do that. And so what I did, if you notice on the bottom, is, and that's a little bit, it didn't reproduce real well, but what I did was I have the line plot, which I made a volumetric line plot. I just turned down the passage dimensions. And then I took each segment of the cave and I put them, and I showed what segment on the line plot you're looking at, and then I just drew them out in pieces. Okay. And I kind of like how that turned out, because it's not like a 3D map of the cave, but it still gives you the three-dimensionality of the cave, which is kind of what I was looking for, in that.
At first, I'm so intimidated by the 3D thing, and I attempted it one time, but to see, I never thought about this idea, and this is just such a good idea as someone who's intimidated by 3D.
So you shouldn't be intimidated by 3D. And if you only tried it once, well, you need to try it more times. And I'm serious. And it takes a while to like I'm not an artist. And so for me, it took me a while to kind of master the whole thing. And you might wonder, well, how do I know if it looks right? And that's the whole point, is if it doesn't look right, then you didn't do it right. If you look at it and you're like, yeah, that's it, then you know you did it right. But doing the 3D thing takes practice. And I'll also show you a couple of other things about how to help yourself make 3D sort of maps. Here's another tag cave. Once again, it totally does not behave. It goes all over the place. How do I make a profile out of that? Well, I decided I was just going to make a profile. I was just going to do the 3D thing. And there's a couple places where I think I could improve this a little bit. But for the most part, I think I gave a sense of what the cave was like, which is what I was looking for. If you'll note on some of my maps that I don't always make north face up. I try to use the angle, whatever angle I show the cave, that best shows the vertical extent of the cave. And the only time I have an issue with that is if north is facing down. I don't like to make north face down. And I haven't I've kind of tried to work around that, but I've made north face all sorts of different directions. And that way it gives you a lot of latitude of how you lay out your map, how you want to show your map. Because when you mapped it, you didn't map it like this necessarily. You mapped it, with north facing up. I also, on this map, I went ahead and I included a topo map with, some information about the cave. Since the cave had kind of a really interesting exploration history, I figured, well, the layout of the cave is going to allow me to put that in there. And so, if possible, I like to include the geology, but I also like to include other things too. Your map doesn't have to be all things to everybody to all things forever. You pick out what you think is important. And considering that we draw these digitally these days, it's not hard to modify your map and say, well, for this one, I'm going to show geology. For that one, I want to show history. For this one, I want to show something else. And you can show all those things with one map because of the way that we can draw maps these days that we couldn't in the past. Here is another, and the size of this map makes it kind of hard to show on this screen. But here was another way that I wanted to show the three-dimensionality of a really complex, multi-level coastal cave. So this cave is in Haiti, and when you put everything on the map, it looks like a big blob. And so what I got to doing was graying out certain levels and just showing one piece of it. Okay, so here, I'm showing that this top part matches the part that you see in the profile. I did that. And I had a series of different profiles. And I felt like that was kind of an interesting way to try to show this complicated cave. Because, there's a lot of information there. And if you could see the real size of the cave, you could see that it really does give a better sense of how that cave is laid out in 3 dimensions. All that stuff on the bottom, where I say perspective view, it's an artistic rendering. It's not perfectly accurate, but it's, for what I want to show, it's accurate enough. And I have all this data. If I want to be really accurate, I can make a different kind of map. It doesn't really matter. And of course, as long as you indicate what your symbols are, it doesn't matter what your symbols are. They could be whatever you want them to be, so it doesn't matter. So one thing I wanted to show, one other thing I wanted to show is, so what do you do? How do you draw this stuff? It's like, I'm intimidated. I don't know how I'm going to draw this 3-dimensional profile. Well, one thing that you have to do is, if you don't understand what you're looking at in 3D, then you can't draw it. You can't draw something you don't understand, or that you can't, conceive of visually. So what I do is I start out with the line plot. Oops, that's not what I wanted to do. Okay, so I just start out with the regular old line plot, and I love to use Compass, by the way. Compass has a lot of really cool applications that let you show different things about the cave, and plus it's still supported, and so I love Compass. But so basically here is, your plan view. And I want to understand, like, how the heck should I draw this? So first of all, because I want to draw a profile it. If your cave looks like this, then, like, naturally, then your profile is pretty easy to draw. Let me get that where I'm trying to show you. Okay. And this is kind of like extended, sort of, but not exactly. So now I have this, but I want to understand where all these passages lie with respect to each other. So what helps me, and I actually specifically asked for this, is I like to use a shadow box. What's a shadow box? Well, this is what helps me visualize the three-dimensional nature of the cave, and it helps me understand it. And so now, with that. It's not showing me my shadow box. Let me see if I spin it around, if it will show it to me. So I do a lot of this. I do kind of spinning around of the cave. Let me try to get that shadow box in there again. There we go. Okay, so when I put that on there, and I like to put just a little bit of a dip on it, not much, just a little bit, just enough. And then I put it on there, and then I rotate the cave around. And what this does is it helps me understand how the cave lays out in 3 dimensions, because the shadow box is now like this visual marker, and my brain understands that. If I didn't have the box around it, it would be harder for me to understand. And so I play around with this, and I figure out what's showing me the best, the most profile as possible. And then if I really want to get a better visualization, then what I'll do is I'll turn on these little 3-dimensional polygons. Did I put that in there? Okay, the polygons draw with passage dimensions, and I think I didn't put the passage dimensions in here. But I have another one that I'll show you where I did put the passage dimensions.
Pat, how much of this, does any of this play into SVG exporter? Or
you can put it in SVG. What do you mean? Can you do that in SVG? You know what? I've never tried it.
No, I guess that wasn't the question, but you just do this in Compass? You don't have to do this in SVG exporter. You just play around with it in Compass.
I play around with it in Compass.
And then does that translate? Do you trace over that in Illustrator at any point, or do you just kind of, that might be too many steps in the question there.
So I had somebody ask me what button do I press to get it to do that. And there is no button to press. That's why, for me, it's important to try to understand, to visualize what your cave looks like,
right,
because then you can draw it. What I usually do is I used to draw it out by hand at first, and then I'd scan it, and then I would trace it. But now I've done it enough times that I could just do it. I could just draw it digitally. And what helps is, let me get this other thing in here. I'm almost done. I don't mean to like hog all this time here. Okay, so here we go. This is kind of a sort of a horizontal cave that it's like, oh my God, it's going to give me a headache to try to understand this. But this always helps me. Like I said, whenever I go do this shadow box thing, and especially if I add the passage walls in there, then that really helps a lot. So now I have the shadow box on there, and then I go and I put in the passage wall modeling, and I'm just going to put in some fill polygons. There's different ways that you can play around with all of those. And then when I turn those on, now I put a little bit of a tilt to my passage, and now I can turn it around. Now I can like spin it around. And now I'm getting a better idea of how everything lays out in 3 dimensions. So this is a pretty horizontal cave here. I think this is a lava tube, but I get a better sense of how the passages are with respect to each other. And then I actually like draw this, like, you know, with pen, with digital pen.
Your this gives you sort of the checkpoint ceiling heights to work with, right?
Yes. So
and that's crucial.
Yes. So it makes it easier. It does. So when you're entering your data, you want to make sure that you have good passage dimensions in general, and then when you look at the 3D model of the cave, then it really, you know, it's not always perfect because of the way that we survey. You'll get some weird little odd angles, but in general, that helps you, like, oh, I know where the floor is supposed to go. You know where things are behind it, because now you can move this thing around and you can look. You're like, oh, I like that. And now you can see it. And so, and there's other ways that help you visualize it. But this is what I do when I'm drawing my plant or my profile. I've got this thing up, and I was like, well, how does this look? Where's this with respect to that? And so I'll look and find it on here. You know, you can turn on your stations. You find where these things are, and then it helps you visualize the layout of the cave. And once you understand the layout of the cave, then drawing it is a lot easier. You should try it. I'm absolutely serious.
No, absolutely. And my first attempt at this was actually with that Fallen Timbers cave map that I had up there. And what I did was I contacted the SVG exporter guy. I'm like, hey, can you add like a tilt to the profile view on SVG? And he's like, sure. I never thought about people wanting to like tilt the passage like that. I was like, thanks. And I got the tilted line plot, and then I just overlaid the regular profile on that. I was like, all right, here I go. And I started playing with it, but it didn't go too well. But this is sort of the key that I was missing, I think.
Yeah, it's like if you're just going for show me the plot so I can trace it, as opposed to let me study the plot a little bit so I understand it. And then once you get your walls in, then you start playing around with those little features of drawing in those little lines to give your passage some dimensionality to it. So if I was gonna, you know, make my wall line width, just say I'm gonna make them a 2 point or whatever, right? So what I would do for the internal part of it is I would make that like 0.2, you know, and so there's a really good contrast there. And then, so otherwise, if you don't have a good contrast, then when you put some of those lines in, it overwhelms the passage, and you're like, oh, that looks like crap. I don't want to do that. And so the line widths are really, really important. And then if you shade it a little bit, that helps a lot too. So there's all these little things that you can do that make it, you know, doable. Yeah.
Have you, on the maps you've shown, those all had cross sections that were connected to the passages. Have you ever used removed cross sections? That is, you put like an A prime, and then away from the plan view, you show A prime and show the cross section. It's removed from the plan view, but show them relative in elevation to one another.
Yes, I did that. I did a map of Bull Cave, and I did it in there. But yes, and so when you have like really mazy passage or passage that doesn't allow you to put cross sections wherever you think you want to put them, then I definitely will pull them out. And then and I have like a reference line, and then of course you have your A, B, D, whatever. And then on that reference line, I don't just line them up horizontally. I put them where they are with respect to each other, because, you know, that's kind of, you know, that helps with the visualization as well, as if you do that.
Yeah,
but absolutely, sometimes you have to do that because you can't put the cross sections in there any other way.
That to me seems like a sort of easy way to show the 3D nature of the cave without doing the difficult gymnastics of trying to draw that 3D view.
But the thing is, it's not difficult gymnastics. It kind of looks intimidating, but I guarantee you that if you understand what you are looking at, then it will make it easier for you to draw it. And it's like anything else, you know, there's a little bit of a learning curve. And if you really, really want to do it, you will, you know, you'll climb the learning curve and you'll pull it off and it'll look great. This is not the way that you want to go. This is not, everybody doesn't have to do this. This is my point I've been trying to make all along. As the cartographer, you're making the map, and unless you're in some project that has some real strict, which is rare, some strict guidelines of what they want you to do, as the cartographer, you can do it any way you want. If you don't want to do a 3D profile and you just want to have an extended one, or if you want to show a series of cross sections that are all with respect to each other, elevation wise, all of those are like totally acceptable. The only important thing is that whoever is looking at your map, that they understand what you're trying to come across on the map. That's like the what do I want to say? That's like that's what you're striving for, is to make something that's
Amen to that.
Yes. And that's it. That's all I have. So shall I give you your screen back? Let's see. Or can you just take it back?
PK, that's awesome. Thank you so much. All right.
And not only, let me tell you, not only do I have cartography children, now I have cartography grandchildren. So y'all know Ben Tobin?
Yep.
You probably know. So I taught Ben how to sketch. And then it wasn't maybe 5 or 6 years ago that his son was like, I want to learn how to sketch. So I taught his son how to sketch. So now I have caving grandchildren, or sketching cartography grandchildren. I'm so proud of you all.
Awesome. Thank you, PK. Thank you, Bo and Dane. These were really great, informative, awesome presentations. Cartography just rocks, doesn't it? It's so cool.
It does.
Yes.
It does.
Yeah. Okay. So next month, May 17th, we'll conclude the first half of the 2023 sessions. We're going to take off June and July. May 17th, come back. Christian DeSalle and Bert Ashbrook are going to present. And as all the other presentations have been awesome, I'm sure that theirs will be as well. Does anyone have any final questions or comments?
Thanks for doing this, Aaron. This is great.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Okay.
It's fun. I mean, I love it. It's great. I mean, that's why
I
we're
love,
here, right? 'Cause it's
I love the discussion format of it. That's really cool.
Thanks. Cool. Okay. Well,
As a last thing, if anybody who really knows how to use GoToMeeting can hang on for a minute. It has nothing to do with cartography. It's a question about GoToMeeting.
okay. Yeah, I'll stick around. Is this Mike?
Mike, yeah.
Yeah, I'll stick around. So, okay. Well, if nothing else on cartography, then this concludes tonight's call. And have a great evening, everyone. And thanks again.
Okay.
Thanks, y'all.
Bye, y'all.
See us.
Ok, gracias from Colombia.